Margaret Ose had covered grand openings for 31 years, ribbon cuttings and keynote addresses, donor lunches and naming ceremonies. And she had learned over those 31 years to notice the moment that broke the script. That morning at the Caldwell Civic Arts Center, the moment arrived at 8:47, while the catering staff was still arranging the orange juice on the reception tables, and the mayor's communications aide was testing the podium microphone for the third time. The lobby was not yet crowded. The light was coming in clean through the east-facing clear-story windows, thin, pale, the particular quality of early morning light that architects design for and visitors rarely notice. Margaret noticed it. She also noticed the man, the security supervisor, stopped near the main entrance doors. He was older, 70 or a little past, compact and unhurried, wearing a plain dark overcoat that had seen better seasons. He carried no conference badge, no laminated VIP credential, no folder of invitation materials. He stood just inside the lobby and looked up, not at anything in particular, Margaret thought at first, but then she saw his eyes move in a specific, deliberate way, along the line where the east wall met the ceiling vault, then to the junction of the secondary arcade with the main span, then down to the terrazzo floor, following something that was not furniture and was not decoration. He was reading the building. The security supervisor's name, Margaret would later learn from the posted duty roster, was Decker. He wore a dark uniform with a private firm's logo on the sleeve, and he moved with the particular authority of a man who had decided, in the first second of his assessment, that the older gentleman in the plain overcoat did not fit the morning's inventory. "Sir," Decker stepped in front of him, not a greeting, an interruption. The older man looked at him without alarm. "I'm going to need to see your credentials for this event. Pre-registered media and invited guests only. If you don't have a badge, I'll ask you to step back outside until general public hours begin at 11. The older man said, calmly, that he was not a member of the general public. Decker's expression did not shift. He had, Margaret suspected, heard that line before. At every opening, every gala, every members-only preview, someone without a badge said some version of it. He had a practiced response. "I understand, sir, but the event this morning is ticketed and credentialed. If you have an invitation on your phone, I can verify it. Otherwise, the service entrance on the Caldwell Street side is open for vendors and contractors, if that's what you're here for." There it was, the service entrance. The quiet assignment of category, not quite an accusation, but an instruction about where someone like him, in that coat on that morning, belonged. The older man did not react to it. He did not straighten his posture in indignation or reach for a phone with the sharp purpose of a man about to produce proof. He simply stood for a moment, looked at Decker without coldness, and said he would wait. Margaret had lowered her pen without being aware of doing it. She was positioned across the lobby near the West Press registration table, close enough to have heard the exchange over the ambient sound of the morning's preparations. She watched Decker redirect the older man to a low bench near the coat check alcove, not unkindly, in the way a person manages someone they have decided is confused rather than consequential, and then returned to his post at the main entrance. The older man sat. He did not check his phone. He did not look around the room with the restless anxiety of someone who knew they were being handled. He looked again at the building. And Margaret looked at him looking at it. There were other people in the lobby by then, a dozen or so early arrivals, foundation board members and city officials collecting their lanyards at the registration desk, a photographer from a competing outlet setting up near the stage platform. None of them looked at the older man on the bench. None of them had seen what she had seen, the way he had entered the building without breaking stride, without the slight hesitation of a visitor orienting himself. He had walked in as people walk into rooms they know by memory, not rooms they have visited, but rooms they have inhabited at the level of decision and detail, where every proportion is the result of a judgment they once made at a drawing table at 2 in the morning. She had been inside the Caldwell Civic Arts Center twice before this morning. Once during the structural completion walkthrough 2 years ago, and once during the pre-opening press preview 3 weeks back. And in those 2 visits, certain things about the building had settled in her mind as remarkable. The way the light fell from the clearstory onto the main floor changed hour by hour in a way that did not feel accidental. The proportions of the secondary arcade, narrower than the primary span, but pitched at an angle that made the 2 spaces feel continuous rather than divided, was a solution she had never seen executed quite that way before. The terrazzo flooring ran in a pattern of diminishing triangles that drew the eye toward the stage end of the hall with an inevitability that felt almost choreographic. She had written about those details in her pre-opening piece, and she had, in the research for that piece, read the project documents carefully enough to know the name behind them. She looked at the older man on the bench. She looked at the curve of the secondary arcade above him. She set down her press folder, walked across the lobby, and stopped in front of him. "Excuse me," she said, "are you Elliot Vance?" He looked up at her with the mild, attentive expression of a man who had been asked a reasonable question. "I am," he said. Margaret had been a working journalist long enough that she did not allow her face to do what she wanted it to do in that moment. She thanked him, excused herself, and walked directly to the project coordinator's station near the staging area. The project coordinator was a young woman named Priya, juggling a clipboard and a radio, and the kind of focused calm that comes from having spent the previous 48 hours managing 17 overlapping logistics crises. Margaret stopped in front of her and said, quietly, that the man sitting on the bench near the coat check alcove was Elliot Vance, and that Elliot Vance had just been directed to wait there by the security supervisor. Priya went very still. Then she said, into her radio, that she needed Gretchen Hale on the main floor immediately. Gretchen Hale was the project director. She had managed the Caldwell Civic Arts Center from permit application to this morning's ceremony. 4 years of her professional life, she had said in the press materials. And it showed in the way she moved through the building, purposeful and proprietorial, knowing every corner. She came across the lobby now at a pace that was rapid without being a run, and she stopped when she saw the man on the bench. And for just a moment her face arranged itself into an expression of unmistakable mortification. Then she crossed the remaining distance, and she stopped in front of him, and she said his name. He looked up, he recognized her, he stood. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I am so sorry, please come with me." He said there was nothing to be sorry about. He said it without irony and without performance, the simple statement of a man who had decided, before the conversation began, that it did not merit anything more than that. Gretchen Hale did not accept the graceful exit she had been offered. She turned and looked across the lobby, and Margaret, watching, understood that what happened next was going to be deliberate and on the record. Decker was called over. He came without hesitation, the confident approach of a man who expected to be confirmed in his judgment. He was not confirmed. Gretchen Hale introduced herself clearly as the project director of the Caldwell Civic Arts Center, and she stated clearly that the man Decker had directed to the bench was Elliot Vance, the lead architect of record for the building, the individual whose professional credential appeared on every permitted drawing, every structural certification, and every design document filed over the course of the project's 4-year development. She said that Mr. Vance had been an invited participant in the morning ceremony at the explicit request of the Caldwell Arts Foundation, the building commissioner's office, and the mayor's office, and that his name appeared on the dedication plaque that would be unveiled in approximately 90 minutes. Decker absorbed this. The confidence had not yet left his face, but it had grown uncertain around its edges. He glanced briefly at Vance, and Vance looked back at him with the same absence of anger he had shown at the main entrance 2 hours before. There was no score being settled in that look. There was only a man waiting for the correct thing to occur, which it was now occurring. A few of the nearby foundation staff had paused in what they were doing. Not visibly, not ostentatiously, but the radius of quiet had expanded, the way it does when people understand that something consequential is being spoken within earshot. Gretchen Hale continued. She said that she would be contacting the director of his firm before the end of the ceremony to report the incident. She said that she was placing the exchange on the administrative record of the event, and that she would be requesting written acknowledgement from the building commissioner's office, who was, she noted, already on the premises before the ribbon was cut. She said this without raising her voice, without heat, without a word intended to humiliate. She was simply making certain that what had happened was documented, named, and answered by process. Then she guided Elliot Vance toward the VIP reception area, where the mayor was already present, where the building commissioner crossed the room when he saw who was coming, and where the two men shook hands in the easy way of people who had worked on the same long project from opposite ends. Margaret went back to her notebook. The dedication ceremony began at 10. The mayor spoke for 7 minutes. The commissioner spoke for 4. And then, without announcement, without flourish, a city council member read the names inscribed on the dedication plaque: the foundation chair, the arts board, the lead contractor of record, and at the end of the list, the architect of record. Elliot Vance. The lobby was full by then, 300 people in formal morning dress, the press section crowded with cameras and recorders, and there was a sound, when that name was read, that Margaret described in her notes as a collective understanding. Not applause, not exactly. The sound a room makes when it recognizes something it should have seen sooner. He did not stand when his name was called. He was seated in the front row of the VIP section, and he acknowledged the mention with a brief incline of his head, the small and sufficient nod of a man who had put his work into the room 40 years ago and had been waiting, quietly, for the room to be finished. The ribbon was cut at 10:43. Before 10:45, the written acknowledgement from the building commissioner's office, a formal statement confirming the incident, its nature, and the identity of the individual affected, was delivered, signed, to Gretchen Hale's clipboard. She had asked for it before the ceremony, and it had been prepared. The director of the security firm was reached by telephone before noon. By the end of business that day, Decker had received a formal written reprimand placed into the administrative file, and the firm had been placed on formal notice by the Foundation's legal office pending a review of their conduct protocols and credentialing procedures for future events. None of that was in the ceremony. It was in the paperwork, which is where such things belong. Margaret had done one other thing before she left the building that afternoon. After the reception ended and the crowd thinned, she had watched Elliot Vance walk the perimeter of the main hall by himself, unhurried, hands clasped behind his back, stopping occasionally at specific points that meant nothing to her but clearly meant something to him. He paused for a long moment at the base of the secondary arcade, looked up at the joint where two structural systems met in a resolution she had once read a technical description of and not fully understood. His expression did not change. But he stayed there for nearly a minute, and then he walked on, and she had the impression that he was doing what he had come to do, checking the work, assessing what had been built against what had been intended, and that the rest of the morning had been, to him, an interval. Margaret filed her piece that afternoon. She wrote about the building, the clear-story light, the secondary arcade, the terrazzo, and she wrote about Elliot Vance, who had accepted his invitation to the ceremony without complaint and had sat on a bench near the coat check and looked at the ceiling of the building he had designed with the patience of a man who had learned, over a long career, that a building's quality was not affected by whether its architect had been given a proper seat. She wrote one other thing, in the closing paragraph, that she had not planned to write when she arrived that morning. She wrote that she had been covering architecture and civic space for 3 decades, and that she had walked into the Caldwell Civic Arts Center expecting to write about a building, and had walked out understanding something that the building had been trying to say all along, that dignity is not conferred by the person standing at the door deciding whether you belong. It is carried in. It is expressed in the work. And on the morning of the opening, when a security supervisor had asked the man in the plain overcoat who he thought he was, the answer had been present in every line of the structure around them, patiently waiting to be read. She had been a journalist for 31 years. She had stood in a great many lobbies. That one she thought she would not forget.